Welcome to the Homegrown Podcast, a place where we share the truth about food and farming from our kitchen to yours. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Andrea Nakayama. Andrea is a functional nutritionist, host of the 15-Minute Matrix podcast, and the founder of Functional Nutrition Alliance. She's leading thousands of students and practitioners around the globe in a revolution to offer better solutions to the growing chronic illness epidemic. And this is exactly what we want to dial into today. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be with you both.
We are excited too, and I want to dive in first by having you share a little bit about your story and how you really got into this.
Yeah, so this was a big career change for me. I used to work in book publishing, so had a totally different career. And when I was pregnant with our first and only child in April of 2000, my late husband, Isamu, was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor.
Wow.
So it was at that time that I took this kind of interest that I had in food and cooking. We lived in San Francisco at the time, and we had these elaborate dinner parties and shopped at the farmers market. We were really into our food. And previous to that, I was feeling some niggling symptoms of my own. So I would always dabble with where does food make a difference. But that situation where he was basically given 6 months to live at the time he was diagnosed, remember I'm 7 weeks pregnant at this time, I really dove in. And I think of that time as my boot camp of learning about where and how food makes a difference. That continued. He lived for 2.5 years, by the way, and that passion continued, almost became like our religion, mine and my son's religion, baby at the time, 23 now. And it really sprung into action for me in a new way that I wanted to change my career when a friend of mine was diagnosed with colon cancer. And I thought, oh, everybody else can help her. She's a naturopath. Everybody else in our community are naturopaths. But then she came to me for certain advice. And I started researching and realizing, wait a minute, this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I saw it make a difference for my late husband. We did a lot of things, but I believe it contributed to extending his life. I saw it contribute to my pregnancy and the health of our child. And so I left my career in publishing, put myself back through many years of school, and the story goes on from there, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Wow, that's incredible. What did that time of research look like for you?
Originally, in the early times of research, Isamu was looking at what clinical trials were available. So he was diagnosed with a type of very aggressive brain tumor called a glioblastoma multiforme. And at that time, remember, this is in 2000, most of the people diagnosed with that kind of tumor were older. So in their 80s, 70s, or 80s, there were less people of his age that were being diagnosed with this kind of tumor. So he was like the poster child for everybody doing clinical trials because they wanted their clinical trial to have good results. And any medical intervention is going to have better results in a young body than in an older body. So he was getting phone calls from doctors all over the country, really wanting to recruit him into their studies. So he was studying in the library about the clinical trials. What am I going to go through? Meanwhile, I was reading this beautiful book that I can see out of the corner of my eye now, one of the early books in the field called Choices in Learning by Michael Lerner. His father had cancer, and he started to look, he was a physician, I believe, or his father was, but he had started to look at all different complementary and integrative treatments. So he looked at food and exercise and meditation, and that led me to other investigations in relation to how does sugar create really foster cancer growth or fast growing cell growth? How do we lower inflammation through food? And so I would bring my learnings to Isamu and say, hey, I'm learning this. What do you want to try? here he was, and I'm sure you can relate, Joey, about to be a father. And so he was going to do everything and anything. You know, a lot of times when we're talking about dietary change, people are like, I don't want to. And when the risk is so high, you are willing to do anything. So that became their journey of making dietary changes, changing our whole way of eating and cooking. And it was really playful and delicious and fun too.
What did some of those early changes look like?
We definitely removed all sugars. So at first it was completely all sugars. He was like, sugar feeds cancer growth, it's out. But he had a total sweet tooth. So I started experimenting with lower glycemic natural sweeteners. There were less available then than there are today. So I was working with like maybe dates or brown rice syrup. You know, we're going back to 2000 here. So there wasn't coconut sugar. There weren't as many options. There wasn't even agave yet, right?
Wow.
So not that I'm a huge fan of agave, but there were different things available. And there were all these fun cookbooks. I would go to old bookstores and find the different books. And we also removed most animal protein, which is not the case for me now, but we became pesca vegan. So we were reducing all inflammatory foods, eliminating the highly processed sugars, and eating a more whole foods diet with a lot of vegetables and fishes.
And the point of that, because I've heard a lot of people who are going through cancer treatment who choose the vegan route. And the point of that is what is that? Are they trying to attack the inflammatory side effects? So unpack that a little bit for me.
Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons. And I will say, as a functional medicine nutritionist now, I don't prescribe to any one dietary theory. It's more about like principles that we're putting in place and what's correct for the individual. We were reducing them because of the inflammatory nature and because they're harder to digest. So it makes sense that proteins are a lot harder for the body to digest. And as he was going through a lot of treatments, we want to get as much nutrition into the body and as many antioxidants, which we're going to get more of in our plant-based foods when we eliminate some of those other foods. We were really careful about our proteins, though, because I was pregnant. So he wasn't eating eggs. He made me eat an egg every day for our baby's brain health. He was like, you're eating that egg. So by that time, I love eggs now. Then I was like, I don't want to eat the egg because this is what we were following. But yeah, we were very careful about the protein intake in order to help with the baby growth and development, and also with growth, metabolism, and repair, which is what nutrition's all about.
Back then, how were you searching for information? This is year
Yeah.
2000. So I'm just imagining I was there in 2000. I mean, I wasn't. And so I'm aware of the fact that the internet wasn't like it was today. So, I mean, were you just burning candles in libraries, or what did that look like?
1,000%. And it sounds so antiquated, right? It's like 2000. I was in my 30s. How embarrassing. But yeah, the internet existed. You could search, like I could search the brain tumor and get like 2 pages, right? But in terms of dietary and lifestyle changes, it was books. I was buying books. I was reading Andrew Weil, you know, like there wasn't a lot of what we have access to now, for better or worse. And I think we might talk about that today. But yeah, there wasn't a lot to find on the web. It was more hardcover. I have so many books from those days, and I would search for like the hippie low sugar, like where's the not refined sugar, apple sauce sweetened, like it was that kind of stuff, but it was starting to get a little sexier.
Yeah. Okay. Again, unpack. I'm using that word again, but the sugar piece is so important. And for those with either chronic illness or cancer, talk to us about why that's a great place to start.
Yeah. So In my way of thinking now, I will always say that sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance are the non-negotiable trifecta.
I
So
love
that's
that.
really something we want to always be thinking about. I'm thinking about it now more in relation to blood sugar balance. At that time, I was thinking about it in relation to inflammation and in the ways that especially white sugar or refined sugar can impact the immune system. So there are studies that show that white sugar will cause certain white blood cells, which are our immune cells, to shrink in their presence. We don't want that. We want to enhance the immune system during cancer diagnosis and treatment, and that they actually do feed those fast growing cells. If we think about glucose in a time of like working out or climbing a mountain. I wrote an article about how my boyfriend eats marshmallows, right? Like he's a climber. He likes to go long distances and he will rely on sugar, like in the form of a marshmallow, because it doesn't make him feel full, to get that quick energy and move, because as an active person, he needs that. That sugar is doing the same thing to and with the fastest growing cells in our body. And in an adult, those are the cells that we might not want replicating as fast as a cancer cell is replicating. So a lot of different reasons, mostly related to immune function and hormone function.
So it's really a fuel source. It's our body's preferred fuel source, right? So when we're dumping extra fuel on the body, if we do have those cancer cells replicating, then we're just increasing that amount of power behind that, right?
Yes,
That
beautiful way of saying it.
that makes total sense. It's hard for people though, and I'm curious how you did that, because you did say your husband had such a sweet tooth. It's challenging to tell someone to cut out their sugar because we're all kind of
Yeah.
sugar addicted low key, probably because we have dysregulated blood sugar. But what are some of the ways that you figured out how to combat that?
Yeah, I think it really was making sure that there wasn't deprivation, right?
Mm.
So as long as we had little cookies that we could eat and little cakes that I was making, and I probably ended up with more of the sweet tooth than he had coming in because I was enjoying making all of these things. But it really is making sure that we're not going into the realm of deprivation when we remove food. So I always like to think about crowding out a food. What do we bring in before we take something out? In a situation like Isamu's, it was urgent and necessity, right? When I'm working with somebody who's making dietary change for a more chronic issue, it doesn't need to be so fast. So we can make sure they have the skills in place to feed their sweet tooth so they don't feel deprived. So it really depends on, are we working with something urgent and acute, or are we working with something chronic and can set ourselves up for longer term success? Does that make sense?
It totally does. And a conversation I often have is that there might be a food or diet protocol that you need to adopt in a season of intense healing. Like if you're
Correct.
going through things, I have family members right now who are going through things, and I'm trying to encourage them. Hey, your diet needs to look a little different. Okay, it's okay to have some restriction in this time because you are at war. You are battling this thing versus having a long-term
Correct.
really sustainable lifestyle. You don't need to have such restriction put into place, but you need to recognize your season. Pregnancy is another great example. If
Yep.
you are pregnant or you are trying to conceive, that is a time where you're like, all right, let's get to it. Let's eat our 2 to 4 eggs a day, or however many you want. Let's get in our protein. Let's make sure that we're fueling our body and staying hydrated and supplementing the way we need to. And I just think even hearing how you guys in his healing process, you went vegan, pescatarian, but you were pregnant, so you still increased your protein and ate your eggs. Great example of two people with two different health goals, and you approached it appropriately for each outcome. And
Yes.
sometimes the world of nutrition, especially online, I know you feel this, is like everyone wants to give you like their top 5 tips, and like it's a blanket statement for everyone. If you just eat these 5 superfoods, just eat your beef liver and you'll be great. And it's like, it's maybe great, but also there's more nuance there. And
Absolutely.
what season are you in? What's your goal right now? So I think that you painted that picture really well. I love that.
Yeah, and I love how you're talking about the season, Liz, because there are places in life for specific healing diets, even diets that may be more restrictive. I think what people do is they stay in that realm of restriction too long, and what they don't realize is they're introducing nutrient deficiencies that lead to further signs and symptoms when the diet is too restricted for too long. Now, eating a pesca vegan diet is not a restricted diet. Eating a diet that doesn't have gluten, dairy, or sugar it's not going to lead to nutrient deficiencies if it is a broad spectrum diet. But I like to think about the way we consider the principles around food instead of the rules. And what I find is people either get overly attached to the dietary theory, so they're on it forever. They're ketogenic or they're autoimmune paleo, or they've totally fixated on this dietary theory and that's their identity, or they did it and it didn't work and they're like, I'm out of here. None of this works. And so there's a lot missing there from a functional nutrition perspective, because nutrition isn't just about the food. It's about what our body can do with the food. And when we've lost touch with that and haven't done the internal healing, we're not using nutrition appropriately.
That's good. What are your thoughts on long-term ketogenic diets?
It really depends on the individual. I will say I'm a fan of diversity in the diet, as is true for the individual. So the kind of circle of influence that I would put around food is quality, quantity, diversity, and timing. So I think timing is important. Does that mean intermittent fasting? No, not necessarily. Not necessarily healthy for everybody. Same with a ketogenic diet. I want to know why we're doing it. Like, are we doing it because there's a long-term brain tumor or there's seizures? Or do we think it's going to help us lose weight, or we like eating certain foods because it is deficient in a lot of nutrients, including all the phytochemicals that we need and all the fiber that we need. So I'm not a fan of a long-term ketogenic diet, and I'm not a fan of a ketogenic diet in a lot of the ways it's used today. I kind of feel like we moved from keto to high protein. I'm like, wow, this is really interesting to watch. Having been in the industry for a little longer, it's like, whoa, here goes the trend. We're just picking another macronutrient to focus on.
Yeah. For those who don't know, a ketogenic diet is high fat. So you run on ketones, and then the kind of the opposite of that. Is it low protein too, or is it just
not necessarily super low protein? Yeah, because the protein could have some fats.
Primarily low carb.
Yeah, primarily low, almost no carb, right?
Yes, correct. Which, then begs where our colors come in.
Yeah, no
right?
plant
So
foods.
yeah, because we then don't have as much of the fiber, which feeds our microbiome that we need for good gut health, which impacts our brain health and our immune health, right? So there's a lot of pieces missing when we get so narrow with our eating regimes, in my opinion, and from what I've seen working with thousands of clients.
Yeah. I'd love to zoom out a little bit and just ask you what you think is sort of the cause behind this chronic illness epidemic that we see going on.
Yeah, I'm a real multifactorial believer. So I don't think it's one thing. I think our environment has changed extensively. I think our microbiomes have changed. I think we're exposed to a lot more things internally and externally. Meanwhile, there's more stressors, there's more processed foods and chemicals coming in. So I think it's a lot of things that continue. There's more antibiotics, there's more immunizations, there's more and more and more and more. So we're bringing in more insults all the time. And it's not just to the people that are alive, it's to our bodies that then actually give birth and go on. So it becomes an epigenetic change that's going on and on and on over time.
I'm sure you've read Kate Shanahan's book, but Deep Nutrition, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
She breaks down the power of this sort of, she kind of calls it like the genetic lottery if you were to win it, because the power of epigenetic expression from, what your grandparents ate and your great grandparents, it
Correct.
all impacts you. And so when people are saying like, they were fine and they grew up eating this, that, and whatever. And I'm like, but their environment was completely different. They didn't have the genetic kind of dustiness that we might have as now the fourth generation or the second generation with glyphosate, or I was born
compounding.
It's compounding. I was born in
Correct.
1991. The vaccine schedule went like doubled then. So everything looks different now. And I think for my peers right now who are having babies, that's one of the biggest things that I am interested in, is like, how can we help reverse some of that negative kind of genetic inheritance, and how can we set the stage for our kids to have beautiful health? We have 3 daughters. I think about their fertility all the time. It changes the way I feed them, the products I let them use, the way I want to approach their wellness on a daily basis. So yeah, if you want to unpack the epigenetic thing even a little bit more, that's such a fascinating topic for me.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about different areas of science that I think functional nutrition ideally really borrows from. And epigenetics is one of those, where we can recognize that the genes may be the deck of cards were dealt, but not how we play that hand of cards, I should say. If we have a hand of cards in a game of poker, we're all going to play that differently. So there's the genes that are there, but then the epigenetics really do make a difference. And as you said, we borrow those from times past. So they're also the stressors. They're times of famine and war. We're seeing some real influencers of what will be epigenetic factors now happening, right? When people are experiencing trauma of any sort, that is going to manifest in the bodies to come. We can't ignore that. So we're turning genes on or off. We're turning them up or down all the time, but we still have influence in the everyday. So the factors that I would say influence our genetic expression are not that complicated. There are food, our movement, our environment, and our mindset. All of those things have the power to influence the expression of our genes. So if we're working with those factors one at a time, or where we can, or what works for us, we are influencing the expression of our genes. We can also look at, what's called adverse childhood experiences for an individual, and how that can manifest in later disease states. Positive childhood experiences also reverse adult childhood or adult chronic experiences. So just realizing that what we do does have and make a difference. I always like to say everything is connected. We are all unique, and all things matter. Lunch matters, sleep matters, poop matters, like it all matters. And we go seeking these bigger, heftier things, but these other aspects can really nourish our bodies and our genes.
Yeah, I love that. You said, remind me your 3 big hitters: poop, sleep, and...
Sleep, poop, blood sugar balance is what I would call the non-negotiable trifecta.
Right, blood sugar balance. So we addressed the blood sugar balance a little because we talked about sugars. Explain the poop thing to me. I was like, how do I form this sentence on the podcast to not say, talk to me about poop? But that's what I want you to do. So let's go there.
Maybe Joey should talk to us about poop in this
particular.
What?
To
poor Joey.
To preface that statement, I just got off of one of the worst stomach bugs.
It wasn't a stomach bug.
Maybe food poisoning,
related illness.
And oh my gosh, I can tell you right now,
he ate tacos at a local restaurant.
I'm not going to be hitting the marks that Andrea is going to be talking about.
Yeah, he's not going to be hitting your big 3. He's way off. But like the broader question, right, is like digestion. I'm guessing is behind the poo point. So talk to us about digestion.
Yeah, so I'm always going to look at digestion as an area that helps us understand what's going on with an individual. And if anybody's talking about nutrition without talking about digestion, we've completely missed the point. We're then talking about nutrition science, which exists outside the body: wine, coffee, broccoli, how's that food, versus talking about what's going on inside the body, which makes it functional. So I believe that poop can be one of our biggest tracking tools or tests. Like we're always and I don't mean poop testing, by the way. I don't mean stool testing. I mean, look in the toilet after you go to the bathroom and know that we should be pooping at least once a day, ideally 3 times a day. You can look at a Bristol stool chart and get a better idea about what your poop looks like. Get familiar with how you're eating and how that changes your poop in moments that are not acute, Joey, and not going through a moment.
Going through a moment.
Going through a moment. But in your everyday, you know you're having a moment because it's not your everyday, right? So that way we can really tune in and see, is what I'm eating making a difference? We don't have to overanalyze. I'm not asking people to navel gaze. It's really just being in tune with, how am I eating? What am I seeing? Is that a place to get help? And I think a lot of times we go for help around the diagnostic. I have SIBO, I have MOLT. People get so fixated on whatever the diagnosis du jour is. And I'm not saying we don't have to go there, but there's more action we can take on our own to show up better informed about what our signs and symptoms are. I'm not pooping every day. I've heard I should poop every day. My poop is loose when I go. It's very hard. It feels sticky. That information is really good information to know about ourselves and to be tracking and to see if how we eat or how stressed we are changes any of that, or when we sleep or don't sleep. You have 3 littles, right? Like sleep can affect a lot of those things that we're talking about. Sleep, poop, blood sugar balance are all going to be interrelated too.
Yes, you are speaking right to my heart right now, because all those things are currently impacting my physiological reality. So sleep is definitely, we're on like we're coming off of like a 6-day sleep strike in our house. Plus Joey's had the time of his life, so that's been wonderful. So you mentioned briefly you're not talking about stool testing, and you have kind of some opinions around this testing posture in functional medicine, functional nutrition. So talk to me about that. What are your takes on testing? When is it appropriate? When is it not appropriate? I would love to hear it all.
Yeah, so I'm going to back us up a little bit and just define functional, because I think that we've kind of gone off in the wrong direction in the world of thinking that functional means functional testing. And that's not the basis of what functional medicine was or was intended to be. So the 3 primary tenets of a truly functional practice are: number 1, a therapeutic partnership. Number 2, we're looking for the roots, not the root. We're looking for the roots. And number 3, we are embracing systems. And that's primarily systems biology, understanding that everything is connected. The gut's connected to the brain. The gut's connected to the immune system. The hormones are connected to detoxification, which are connected to digestion. By the way, we can't talk about hormones without talking about poop and sleep, right? So all of these things are connected. And those are the bases and the tenets of a truly functional practice. It is not about testing. It is not about supplements. It is not about mitochondria, right? It's not about methylation. Those things matter, but we have to make sure we're tending to the soil. So for me, when I'm looking at testing, and there are certain functional tests that I love, but I'm looking for them when I need more information. They're not a first stop, and they're not a diagnostic tool. They don't tell us what the protocol is. So I always want to look at serum labs first. What's going on at a gross level? Like if somebody's sodium potassium is off and their cells aren't getting the hydration they need and their red blood cells are shrinking and then they're having iron issues, why am I looking at their stool and their Dutch test to look at their hormones when they're dehydrated? And when I say to them, from your serum labs, my question is, are you drinking enough water? And they're like, actually, I don't drink enough. Like, why are we going to these downstream? Those are not roots. Those are branches, as I call them in my 3 roots, many branches model. The roots are our genes, digestion, and inflammation, all of which we've kind of talked about and have to be tended to. So I am in favor of functional lab testing of specific sorts when I need more information. People are getting labs to tell them they have leaky gut. I can tell them they have leaky gut. We don't need a test for that. We can work on gut permeability and hyperpermeability and restore gut function. That's just a part of healing. So I feel like we've made functional medicine and functional nutrition off limits, not accessible. I would love to democratize what functional nutrition really is so that it can be accessible to anyone and isn't about spending a lot of money out of pocket in a concierge practice where you're supporting their business by paying for tests and supplements that they'll keep running.
Yeah.
Just a little opinion.
No, I love that. My hypothesis for that is that, because I often hear people say when they go, anytime you throw the word functional on something, they get a little like, ooh, that's, alternative. And sometimes they're like, they just need the lab to almost like legitimize the conversation. So my hypothesis is, coming from a super traditional medical realm, people might be like, I need the lab to bolster my confidence in this approach, because if not, then I'm just having a conversation with a practitioner who's telling me my gut has holes, and that's foreign to me. So I can see where we have this inclination to like want to run labs and run these diagnostics. But I love what you're saying, because it's so expensive. And a lot of this can just be like, hey, I love the phrase, don't major in the minors, right? Let's just hit the key points first. Let's make sure you're hydrated, you're pooping, you have your blood sugar regulated, and I'll never remember all three at the same time. But
sleep, poop, blood sugar balance, but hydration and exercise. Yeah, I mean, all of those things, I call it the right side of the matrix. Yeah. And what I will say to what you're saying, I think it's true. People want data. And I think we get fixated on a piece of data outside of our bodies. A lot of that data that comes from those functional testing means isn't scientific. Like, it doesn't have a lot of science behind it that helps us know it is the answer. And even if it shows us that there's a microbial imbalance, we can tell by symptoms that there's a microbial imbalance. So we don't need to even identify it as leaky gut or gut hyperpermeability. We can talk about it through the lens of bloating and poop. Like, we don't need to use these fancy words to then validate that our fancy words are true. Then treat it with something that we already would have needed to do, or it's leading us in a direction that is, again, downstream, not dealing with, are you eating enough fiber? Are you feeding your microbiome? Are you sleeping and exercising? Because that too feeds your microbiome. Hey, are you chewing? Because that's what helps break down your food. Like, there's a lot. I don't mean to simplify it, but I do think of it as the simplicity on the other side of complexity, which is how the best thinkers throughout history have solved the most complex problems. There's often a simpler solution than we're anchoring on, and we've made the solutions so complex. When I say that, I want to be clear that I've worked with many people with really hard to address chronic health issues. So I'm not saying it's the only thing that needs to be done, but without it being done, we are building on quicksand. And then we're leading to those people who are very angry because all the diets, all the supplements, all the things they did are not working. And then they don't want to do any of it. When you and I know that dietary changes can make a difference, that sleep makes a difference, but they were led down a road that didn't address those underlying factors. I also just want to say, like, for me, the science of functional nutrition and functional medicine, when people think like, oh, it's alternative, the science of physiology is what it is based on. It is the science of the body function. And when we think it's some like wackadoodle thing, we're basing our notion of science on conventional medicine, which is the science of evidence-based medicine, which I have an article coming out about next week on my personal website, which is really faulty. It's funded by a lot of agencies that have personal interests. The science of the body, a physiology. This is how the gut's connected to the brain. This is what's happening in your digestive system. These are the enzymes you should be creating. That is science. To think it not science is where we've gotten really wonky in our notion of what science is. One more thing to say about science. The scientific method tells us that we prove ourselves wrong, not right. But that's not what we're seeing out there in providers. Providers want to prove themselves right and not wrong.
Yeah, I love that, because it's a conversation we often have is, because we'll run into people who, we just talked about this on the show, they're like, well, we're just trusting the science. And it's like, they're trusting this evidence-based, conventional one version, one tiny little corner of the scientific community that isn't even in alignment with each other. So there's contradiction within that space. So what do you mean you're trusting the science? There's more to that, and having your basis in physiology. Let's talk about how the body works. If humans are just taught that in school, I'll tell you, I never took a physiology class in my life. Why is that? Why aren't we taught the basics? You take biology, you learn about how frogs, morph from tadpoles, but you don't learn about your own bodily systems. How silly is that?
I know. I'll tell you that, like, the first time I think I was actually touching what I now call functional. So first of all, I like to think like functional, it works, right? Like, that's what the word functional means. Well, it works. Like, this isn't hocus pocus. It's not like, go say Om in a room, whatever you have issues to. It's just talking about, it works. Like, it works, and we're talking physiology. But I think looking back, this is before I was a practitioner and when I was going through my fertility journey. So even before Isamu was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I read a book called Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which is now like a classic. None of these apps existed. I had to like create a little chart with a ruler, and like I feel really old, but like I had it on a pin in my bathroom with like a pen hanging from it. And I would take my temperature every day. And I had gone through 9 months of trying to get pregnant, and I didn't know what was happening. I was really frustrated. So I bought that book. I read that book. I understood how my fertility worked when I was ovulating, what changes were happening in my body, and I tracked it, and I got pregnant.
Wow.
So for me, that, like, looking back, I'm like, oh, that was functional nutrition. That's what I was doing. I was tracking what should be going on in my body, understanding what should be going on physiologically, and that gave me the answers.
Yeah, how powerful is that? I love that. I want to get into a little bit more about these different branches of science, and something that's totally new to me is this. I'm gonna butcher it. Omics.
It's just omics. Yeah, you can think of it like the genome or the microbiome. Those are omics. Those are omic factors. Yeah.
Okay, so talk to us about how these influence how people have different kind of responses to a various stimulus.
Yeah, so when I said that mantra that I hold, everything is connected, we are all unique, all things matter. To me, those relate to different areas of science. And I'm always bringing the practice back to the science. So everything is connected is omics. That's what omics are about. The microbiome is a universe of things that exist together. The genome is a universe of things that influence each other. The epigenome, the metabolome, the field of omics is looking how things aren't singular. They influence each other. So when I say simply, everything is connected, that's related to the field, the emerging field of omics, which is looking at connections to each other. Everything is connected. We are all unique. That's related to the field of precision medicine. And precision medicine is an evolving field that is mostly used in cancer care and in treatments, pharmaceutical treatments for mental health conditions. So the way I'll kind of land this is when we think about some of the people who might have tried an SSRI or an antidepressant drug and they had the opposite effect, or we were seeing some youth, die by suicide because of these things, we then can look and stop and say, how does this individual respond to these treatments because of their individual makeup? So in cancer, they may take understand the genetic makeup of the cancer cells and target the treatment to those cells. So it's not about where it is in the body. We're not treating breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, colon cancer. We're treating the makeup of that person's tumor that happens to be in that part of their body in a targeted fashion. That's the field of precision medicine. So it hasn't expanded very far beyond those two arenas just yet, but there's a lot we can borrow from that idea that we are all unique, that just because I have Hashimoto's, which I do, doesn't mean I follow the same protocol as my colleague or my mother or a student of mine who also has Hashimoto's, right? It takes it out of the diagnostic and into the individual. So that's what I'm borrowing from the realm of precision medicine. All things matter is that epigenetic realm. So just recognizing, yes, sleep and relaxation matter, exercise and movement matter, nutrition and hydration matter, stress and resilience matter, relationships and networks matter. So just seeing that, like, this is science. We're thinking through and borrowing from physiological function, and then these emerging fields of scientific study that are recognizing that everything is connected, we are all unique, and all things matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of something you'll see a lot, and I know we've kind of dabbled in this too, is like in the online world, you'll see, oh, you might be dealing with mold illness if you have these symptoms, XYZ. And something I always think about is like, how did we ever live in wooden, houses in the woods without proper
Portland,
ventilation?
Oregon, here, like
Right.
Mold City.
Mold City. So I was trying to think of a more eloquent way to say that, but I couldn't think of it. So part of me is like, is our resilience going down as a human species? Maybe, but also this blanket statement of, again, something else we've been dealing with. If you were bit by a tick, what
Yes.
is your necessary, route going to be? Like, you are going to get Lyme disease or another, co-infection, XYZ. All of our bodies respond differently, but how are we supposed to parcel out what to make of that? Because we are so unique. If we
Yes.
do see symptoms in someone and we're looking for that, how do we unpack that? Like, what's the best way?
I think that this is where we have to get a little bit more simple in what we're buying into and how we're living our lives, joyful, like not obsessed and caught in this sympathetic dominant seeking the fix state, which I think is heightened quite a bit with the onslaught of noise we are now exposed to. I'll tell you, I used to call it the epigenetics of the online telesummit because Instagram and TikTok weren't so prevalent. And back in the day, there were all these telesummits where all these experts, my colleagues, were showing up, giving recommendations that were based on diagnoses that they were talking about very generally. And so I gave a presentation to those colleagues at some point and said, you're changing people's health course by allowing them to self-diagnose and self-treat. And I'm not saying that we don't do things to help us feel better, but the amount of things that we're buying into at this point and really seeking is oftentimes out of our scope of understanding. I'd rather patients tune into themselves and be able to show up at the doctor saying, I have diarrhea. It started when I thought I had food poisoning. It's lasted this long. It seems to get better when and worse when. I noticed if I eat, I'd rather us be more tuned in than tuned out.
Mm.
And this is the social media, it's the testing. All of that information is outside of us. And I think we're losing sight of the information and even the data, like in my fertility story, that our own body can tell us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. I'm as a parent, something I've been trying to do is ask my kids when something's going on. I'm like, is your body telling you anything? Can you tell me anything about how you're feeling? Because it's hard when you look at kids that are showing new symptoms and you're like, what's going on here? And so even just ask that question, sort of turn it on them a little bit and start opening up that language for them could be really helpful. I think
Yes.
kids are intuitive and they don't have all
Yes.
the mental block that maybe us adults do. And they'll tell you their, BM habits, right out. They'll just say it,
Totally.
so they're pretty open with that.
Yes.
That's awesome. Joe, you've been so quiet.
I know.
I'm just listening. I don't want to interrupt the flow here. So yeah, don't stop it for me.
So we covered testing, which I really appreciate your unique perspective. I haven't heard a lot of people in the functional nutrition space kind of talk against that. So I think that is interesting. I'm curious if you can share some of almost the case studies of people you have worked with these really complex diagnoses and how food has impacted them.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the primary work I do right now is teaching other clinicians. So at the Functional Nutrition Alliance, Full Body Systems is my 10-month training in the science and art of functional nutrition. And I've trained over 8,000 practitioners in over 68 countries now. So that's the majority of the work I do. We do have an online clinic. So I do have nutritionists who work like as TAs in the classroom, but also see clients. And I'm focusing a lot more on my writing and how to bring this back to the patient world in a non-clinical, like not direct, I'm working with you one-on-one fashion. How do we give these tools to people to slow down and come into themselves? That said, I am currently working with two 17-year-old boys, ironically. One I've worked with since he was a little boy, and he eats the quote unquote perfect diet because he had allergies to the point of severe anaphylaxis as a child. So was repeatedly in the hospital, had to sleep sitting up. His parents always scared. So he had severe allergies and has been doing incredibly well to the point where now as a teenager, he has a dog, he plays soccer, like all the things he couldn't do because of the grass and the dander and all of it. So he's fine, but he's really suffering with some severe eczema, which I know you spoke about on the podcast. And so going through with him how he navigates that treatment, but his diet is already what I would say I want it to, like, there's nothing I would change there because we changed it from when he was a child, like an 8-year-old when I started working with him, and he's 17 now. So there is one situation where it's really about making sure he's hydrating while he's going through this treatment and sleeping and all the things that will help him through the protocol that he's doing with me and a physician. So it's a yes and. The other 17-year-old boy has been diagnosed with PANDAS, very minor, so very minor elevation of some autoantibodies there. But when I look at other lab markers, because I don't want to just see those fancy markers, I want to see what else is going on. His lipid panel, so his cholesterol and his LDL and HDL and triglycerides look like that of a 55-year-old man who's been eating a standard American diet his entire life. And this kid can't change his diet because he has obsessive behaviors around food. So this is a situation where all I can do is really work with him to get tuned in and help him find other people who can work with him on the addictive. That's not my area of strength. I'm not a mental health counselor. So there's an addictive piece that needs to be worked on. He's also on a lot of medications, right? So I have to be holding space for the whole thing and recognize that I don't get to put this kid on a diet because I will do no harm And by putting a kid that's 17 that has obsessive eating behaviors on a diet, I would be doing harm. So I just wanted to give those two examples where that shows like they're both 17-year-old boys. They're very unique in how I have to approach the case. And yes, it's their food, but it's also all of those other things, the sleep and relaxation, the exercise and movement, the stress and resilience, and how we bring that all in. I always like to say that nutrition is about growth, metabolism, and repair. That's the meaning of nutrition. But there's so many other things that help with growth, metabolism, and repair. So with the kid who has obsessive eating behaviors, all we're working on is fat, fiber, protein at every meal. Every meal. Ask me questions. What do you got? Like, what's there? Let's figure out the things you can bring to school instead of not eating and then binging at Starbucks. Fat, fiber, protein. So it really is a unique approach. Do I know the diet that I'd like to put him on for his diagnosis? Sure. Is that the right thing for me to do? Not at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you have to, that's the functional piece. It has to fit within what is doable for that specific patient. Or I think about all of the parents who have children who, like with that example, maybe really picky eating, or they have
This one too. Yes.
Yeah, sensory issues that they feel like are preventing them from giving them the most optimal diet. But how can you still work within those parameters? I think that's a really good display of what that looks like, is to say, hey, fat, fiber, and whatever, protein and hit it, you know?
Yeah.
So
all those threes.
I know, I'm like, I keep blanking out on the third one. It's like,
I'll have a lot of threes.
I love that. No, I really appreciate that. I think sometimes when people are facing I'm going to say like larger diagnosis, whether it be all of a sudden like autoimmune diagnosis or cancer or something similar, food is often the last piece of the puzzle. And I want to hear your encouragement for folks who feel like, hey, my doctor's putting me on chemo, and so I'm just going to go down that route. And how can they marry that with maybe a respect and understanding of also their food, their sleep, their digestion, etc.?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I always like to think about the work that I do and I teach as the yes and. I'm not going to say like, hey, don't do chemo, go on a juice fast. Like, that's just not my approach. And what I experienced with my late husband is, you know, he did all the things, but we also did all the things, right? Like, it was a yes and. I think there's a lot to consider when somebody is facing a diagnosis. And I see a diagnosis of cancer and autoimmunity as really different because you're faced with a different risk that's right in front of you. And so it becomes a weighing of what am I willing to change in face of what I'm going through right now. I just went through this with my boyfriend's mother, who passed just a few weeks ago, but was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And at first she made some little minor dietary changes, and she didn't really want to do much more. And I have to realize, as much as my boyfriend wants to stick me on the case, that I have to read the room and see what she's willing to do and take that lead so that I'm getting her to exercise some breathing, get her body moving. Is she hydrating, right? So that's not my sweet spot. I want to get really into all the nitty gritty and not be somebody's accountability partner. That was more of a family member. But I think it's how big is that risk to that individual, and what kind of change are they willing to make to feel better? And that's a very, very individual scenario. And like you were referring to, Liz, it's also a belief system. Do they believe there's a difference? So I believe that nutrition in all its forms can not only change the trajectory of the cancer, but help the body to navigate the treatment. A lot of those treatments are very toxic, and there's a lot we can do. If somebody's not hydrating, they're not sleeping, they're not pooping, they're retoxing from that treatment instead of detoxing from that treatment. So there's a lot we can do, but the desire, the motivation has to be there for the individual, and we can't impose it on anybody.
Yeah, that's really good. It's hard too if you're in
I
that
know.
space.
So
It's really
hard.
hard.
So
Yeah.
hard. I mean, this is like the biggest problem my students encounter because they believe in something so
Yeah.
deeply and they want to convince the people they love. And I often have them watch that video, Tea and Consent. You're not at the consent conversation probably with your kids yet, but there's a conversation that's about sexual consent and not pouring tea down somebody's throat, like making sure there's consent. And I use that as an analogy. If you don't have the consent to work on something with your partner, with your child, with your parent, with your sister's son, whatever it is, if you don't have consent, then back down. I'm not showing up in my family situations like the nutrition czar, ready to tell everybody they're like, everybody do their thing. If you need me, I'm here.
Yeah.
And then I'll gauge what you're ready for. But that honors their individuality instead of imposing right and wrong, good and bad, clean and dirty onto a situation.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else that we haven't covered yet that you want to dive into?
I think I just want to talk about, because we talked about like, is it keto? Is it all these different ways or theories? I want to just touch on when we're thinking about healing protocols or dietary theories. And again, there's a time and a place for everything, a season, like you said so beautifully, Liz. I do like to bring it back to principles, and I want to share those principles because I think that it's a good takeaway for everybody. And I said one, which was fat, fiber, protein. So every meal, fat, fiber, protein. This is going to relate to the sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. They're interconnected. Everything starts to work together like omics, right? Like they all start to touch each other. So fat, fiber, protein is principle number one. Principle number two is eat the rainbow. And this is where we get a lot of our phytonutrients, a lot of our micronutrients that we might otherwise be missing. Really fun to do with kids because you can put something up and say, what colors of the rainbow did we eat today? Everybody could have their own column. It becomes really playful for adults or children or families or whatever. The third principle that I like to remind people of is what I call the yes, no, maybe list. And we can all sit down and think through, what do I know makes me feel really good? What do I know does not make me feel good? And what am I unsure about? And if our diet's restricted, what do I wish I can eat? And if people showed up with that information about themselves to anybody they're asking for help with around their diet, that's a really great conversation starter to understand an individual better because they understand themselves and have questions around things.
With those different principles that you've shared, I love that. It's like macros, it's eat the rainbow, and then we're talking about like a yes, maybe no list, which again, she's in the threes all day.
She loves the threes. You love the threes.
At that 3-point line.
It's a magic number.
It's great. No, I love it. I think it makes a ton of sense. Talk to me about, are there foods, are there like superfoods or things that, hey, if we incorporate this into our diet in some capacity, this is just, no matter who you are, this is most likely going to be beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, there's superfoods I personally love or that I'm bringing in therapeutically for things, but I do think it comes back to our plant foods and the quality of our foods that are going to make them super. Like an egg can be a superfood, is a superfood, especially if it comes from a very particular source. And our broccoli sprouts, those are superfoods. So I think there's a lot of things we can look to first and foremost. And then if you like playing and you want to put bee pollen and mulberries in your granola, go for it, right? Like there's so many things we can do when we're playing. But I think first and foremost, it really comes down to the fact that our steak can be a superfood if it's coming from a cow that has been fed properly. So there's so much I think we overlook when we get too fancy.
You cut out for just a second.
Sorry.
So we were just like letting it catch up. We heard the steak part. Okay, what is with the bee pollen thing? Because I'm currently taking a supplement and it has bee pollen in it. And I want to know what are the benefits to bee pollen?
Yeah, I actually have a great podcast with Josh Gatalis, a Canadian functional nutritionist, on bee medicine, if anybody wants to find that episode. But there are a lot of antioxidants and anti-inflammatories and proteins in the bee medicine. So lots of different attributes depending on what we're using. But it was a really fun deep dive with him.
Oh, fun. Yeah, cool. It's just one of those like very not rogue, but it's just kind of out there. I was like, bee pollen. How are we even collecting this? I don't.
Oh, really? I love bee pollen. And some people can't handle it. Like my boyfriend can't handle it. Makes, that's one little pellet will make him feel it in his nasal area.
Oh,
Whereas like I could eat it by the spoonful, especially local bee pollen, really good for our immune systems if it works.
I love this. I anything else that though you hit your 3 principles. I love that you have principles instead of food rules. I think that that's cool. A little phrase we like to say is food education leads to food freedom.
Yes.
So when you learn about food and you learn what works with your body, you don't have to have this restriction. You can have your indulgence that makes sense for your body in your current season. So
yes,
very parallel kind of philosophies there. Yeah, Andrea, will you let people know where they can find you and learn more? Because you're such a wealth of knowledge. I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface today. So let people know where they can find you.
Thank you. So it's easiest to find me at andreanakayama.com, where more of my new writing is. That will lead you back to the 15-Minute Matrix, which is the podcast, and to the Functional Nutrition Alliance, which is where I train practitioners and where we work with patients directly. So andreanakayama.com in all the places, on Insta, LinkedIn, on the web is where you can most easily find me.
Beautiful. And we will link all those below in the show notes for anyone curious on the spelling, because I know your last name's a long one. So awesome. Well, thank you, Andrea, for coming on the show. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you.
Yeah, until next time, Andrea. Thank you so much. And with that, Andrea Nakayama has left the virtual chat.
I'll tell you what, I always read the intro online and I'm so sensitive to mispronouncing names. And the way you just say their names, like you nail it every time. Maybe you should start reading the intro.
Every time we've done an intro and you've looked at me and been like,
remember I always think like Kate and Marius on and I said Marius and it was not good.
I do remember that.
See, I never want to disrespect, but sometimes names are hard.
I don't know what it is.
DM me if you think Joey should start reading the intro.
I definitely shouldn't.
Because I don't want to hold that torch anymore. I'm just kidding. What a great conversation. Andrea's amazing. It really hit home for me personally and a lot of things that are going on, which I haven't ever shared. So I won't be sharing that. But great conversation, great little nuggets to take away.
Yeah, I really enjoyed her and her just ability to articulate thoughts. And I was just sitting there listening most of the time.
Did it remind you of the podcast we were watching last night, kind of?
It kind of did, of the way that she would just like unpack thoughts and like go down that hole enough to where I'm like, I know everything about that now. And then it was like, all right, well, on to the next thing here. Yeah. Let's ask the next question.
Yeah.
Love that. Definitely hit up Andrea. Find her on Instagram. Check out her website, her courses, her classes, all of her things. Man, she's a gangster. Love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll appreciate you calling her a gangster.
She's awesome.
That's the highest honor coming from Joey.
Is that?
Joey Hazelmere. Yeah, he doesn't use that term lightly.
Well,
if you think this podcast is gangster,
yeah,
you can leave a 5-star rating and review.
I'll tell you what's really going off the rails lately are these outros.
I kind of like it.
Do you like it?
I don't know.
I mean, I just feel like people, if you've made it to this point in the outro, just these minute and 55 seconds that you were in right now.
Just know that we sit in the studio after our guest has left and we record the outro just as a way to like say goodbye to you personally. And then also like fill you in on what's going on in our lives. And sometimes they get a little hairy. Sometimes they turn into like podcast 2.0.
Or we just keep rolling.
We talk about something else.
Clearly we love to talk.
So I'm sorry about that. Anyways, if you like the podcast, leave a rating and review. It helps us push the podcast to more people. We appreciate your love on the show. Your comments are always super helpful. If you want to support us in other ways, I'm taking your job.
Get it.
You can visit homegrowneducation.org and you can check out our curriculum. We've got meal plans.
Curriculum, you say?
Curriculum.
Like, what kind of curriculum would we find on Homegrown?
Let's see.
Man, I just didn't know.
We've got real food nutrition curriculum for both 3rd through 6th graders and pre-K through 2nd grade. So we really covered everywhere from pre-K to the 6th grade. And we needed something for our family to teach them about real food. And so I created that. And it turns out a lot of other people are looking for the same thing. So if that's you, go check that out.
There's
Homegrowneducation.org.
There's an impact that we're going for here with the curriculum, right? And the reason we created it for our kids was not for fun enough, and more so for the wanting to change their generation to being folks that are more self-sufficient, more self-reliant, more capable of making decisions for themselves that are good.
Mm-hmm.
And what we don't want are to create a bunch of reliant children on the system. And this is not because the system is out to get us, even though, gosh, I don't need to unpack that can of worms. So many people probably think they do. I think there's a lot of ways that the quote unquote system, the conventional way food is being done, commercial education, conventional foods, whatever, starts out with good intentions in many cases. And then it kind of goes sideways. And next thing you know,
Podcast 2.0.
we need to set our kids up to be self-reliant, to be able to take care of themselves, to be able to read the back of an ice cream box label and identify these ingredients don't make sense because I know how to make ice cream.
Yeah.
I understand my macronutrients. I can watch a video of a professional food eater with my dad where he eats 20 pieces of cake.
Real story.
And the first thing out of our 7-year-old's mouth is he's going to eat a lot of protein.
Yeah, she did say that. He's going to need a lot of protein.
Which, I don't know how legit that is, but it was funny to hear her say that.
It was very funny.
So, get your kids on these curriculums. That's kind of the moral of this very long-winded story, because we're trying to change this from being the next generation's problem as well. Right now, it's something that we have to deal with. Learning, listening to podcasts, listening to annoying people like me talk for way too long on an outro.
Someone just said amen somewhere. I know it. Someone was like, amen,
they're
Joey.
clapping.
You gotta wrap it up.
Land the plane.
You gotta land the plane.
Land the plane. Children's curriculum, homegrowneducation.org. Go check that out. You can find us on Substack. Go to substack.com and search Homegrown Education. You can find us there for exclusive podcast content. We also send out recipe guides. We send out shopping lists, all kinds of stuff on that Substack. Go check that out. That is $8 a month. That is a way to kind of support directly what we're doing right now, because we work very hard to make sure that this podcast is out on a regular basis to keep the world moving in a good, positive direction.
Every single week.
Anyhow, additionally, we have a store. It's called shoptheh.com. Go on there. We've got coffee, tea. We got home goods, things for you to put in your house that are clean and vetted through our system to help you not have to worry so much about turning around that label. We're trying to do all of that for you in advance so you can go on there and find those things. We love coffee. We love tea. We love sourdough. We got all kinds of stuff on there for those sorts of things and so much more. Go check it out. Shoptheh.com. And if you want to hear more from us, you want to hear us talk more or see us more,
or DM me and tell me that Joey should read the intro.
Because we just don't hear him talk nearly enough. So have him read the intro. You can find us on Instagram. Liz is at homegrown_education, at Liz Hazelmeyer, and I am at Joey Hazelmeyer. And until next time, that's a wrap.